Okay, we are live. I'm gonna give a little count up for a little snippy snip. How's everyone doing out there? A little adrenaline rush for the fantasy football world this morning, and we got just the guy to take care of it. Everyone, hope you're doing well out there. Let's go ahead and start. 3, 2, 1. What is the correct reaction to the Cam Akers Achilles injury? That and more this week on the couch. Jason Wood, react to me. Cam Akers, torn Achilles first. But
yeah,
we have to act. What do we do?
Well, I mean, the correct reaction is to be disappointed. I think, I think it's the strange sickness we have in our line of work, Sig, where we haven't had any actionable news in some time. So we're always looking for little tidbits, and this is obviously very actionable news. And you hate to, it's just in our line of work we have to react. I mean, it's a huge deal for him and the team, and it's negative, but obviously for us it gets our brains pumping. And I think a couple things. One, the Rams depth chart is relatively thin, right? Depending on what you think of Xavier Jones and Raymond Calais, both undrafted free agents. I think Xavier Jones is a talented kid, so he becomes an interesting dynasty sleeper. He's probably not rostered on some dynasty leagues. But the big question is, what do we do about Darrell Henderson, right? From an opportunity perspective, he vaults immediately into the number one running back position. I think lots of people are already speculating as to whether or not they will bring in a veteran. I think it's very likely they do bring in a veteran. So the question we need to ask ourselves, Sig, is, are there any veterans that they could bring out? Your Le'Veon Bell reuniting with Todd Gurley, pick your poison. Are there any of those moves that would change the way we think of Darrell Henderson as a fantasy commodity now that Akers is out of the picture for the year? And I guess that just comes down to whether or not you think Darrell Henderson can be a true running back one. I guess I'm probably a little different than some of our other staff based on our chatter that we had this last half hour. So I don't think Darrell Henderson, at least from the coach's perspective, is someone capable of being a full-time tailback.
Agreed.
So that tells me that regardless of whether any of us think he's capable, it doesn't really matter. He saw less than 50% of snaps for the majority of last season when he was splitting with Malcolm Brown, who's a pretty terrible running back, honestly. And then once Cam Akers won the coaches over with his ability to block and pass protect, as we know, he became a true workhorse. And you saw Henderson's snap count fall below 30%, sometimes below 20%. So I think we know that the coaches don't want Henderson to be a workhorse,
right?
Whether it's durability or talent or vision or knowing the playbook, I don't know, some combination of all. So my supposition is Henderson, from an ADP perspective, vaults probably into the third round because it's so barren out there. He's probably drafted now as a running back 2 with upside. And if that's what happens, I will be passing on him, and I'll be putting him in my August update when we do our overvalued players. I would not feel comfortable drafting Darrell Henderson in the third round as my RB2.
Right. Fourth round, I think, is where you start to think about him. Darrell Henderson is in a tier now with Myles Gaskin, with Mike Davis, with players that you say, well, opportunity is there by default, but how much do we trust this player?
That's exactly right. And I didn't make the Myles Gaskin comparison just now on Twitter, but I should have. But I did make the Mike Davis. He immediately reminded me of Mike Davis, right? The Falcons change head coaches. They hire an offensive mind who basically was the most run heavy play caller in the league. They jettison Gurley, understandably. They signed Mike Davis, and we're like, oh, that's interesting. That's a good number 2 for whoever they draft as their workhorse tailback. And then they proceed to not sign anybody else and not draft anybody else. Well, they have Javian Hawkins, but same thing. Yeah, I think Mike Davis is borderline overdrafted right now too, because people look at him and say, well, he has to be the workhorse. Well, listen, people, the fact is not every NFL offense is successful. The answer here could be that any of these 3 running backs just aren't very good, and the teams struggle to effectively run the ball. Now, I will say the Rams are fortuitous in a way in that they did make the trade for Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is very used to being a super high volume passing one-dimensional quarterback that doesn't have a great ground game. So he's probably let out a big sigh today and thinking, oh, here we go again. The Rams could end up being a bit more pass happy than they intended to be. And that may affect them as a Super Bowl contender, but at least they have a quarterback who's more than comfortable in that kind of offense.
So sifting through these things, sifting through the rubble. And again, first and foremost, we say, for Cam Akers. And
For sure.
There's a larger story there too that we can get to. But let's look at the immediate ripple effect here. You mentioned Matthew Stafford, and we're going to talk about projections. I thought this was going to be, when we scheduled the show yesterday, Woodrow, I thought we were going to have a nice little stroll through the park talking about projection puzzles and things that are difficult to tease out and projections and what we're going to look for in training camp. And we are going to talk about that. But obviously the Richter scale was registered this morning with this Akers injury. So pass volume. So when we go look at our projections, I don't know how you can be honest and have the same pass run split that you had yesterday for the Rams. Now, there's still a personnel move yet to be made. If you're the Rams, you have designs on winning the Super Bowl this year. You cannot go into the season with Darrell Henderson, and I do think the team has some misgivings about his durability. I do not think you're going to see Darrell Henderson get more than 50, 60% of the touches. I just think the team knows that, especially with a 17-game season, expecting to play well into January, that he's going to hold up based on early returns. Now, he can still be a decent pass catcher. He can still be a 3-down back, but I don't know that they're going to use him to the extent they were using Akers late last year when Akers really took over the backfield. Like you mentioned, Malcolm Brown, who's competent, an ultra competent running back. We're going to see him do this down in Miami, speaking of Myles Gaskin. We're going to see him do this in Miami, where, again, we don't understand, because we like the flash, we like the sizzle, we like the upside, that coaches like assignment sound running backs.
Right.
And this is kind of a corollary to running backs don't matter, right? In so much that if you just have a competent running back, they can harvest the requisite value from the play. Just run the play, pick up your block, run the pass route the way you're supposed to. Coaches like that. Malcolm Brown can do that, even though he doesn't add value. So obviously they want a running back that is going to give them some veteran depth. All they have behind him, you mentioned Raymond Calais, he's a scat back. Jake Funk, they got a speed back, coming back from an injury. Xavier Jones made the team as an undrafted free agent last year. You just can't expect to be playing football deep into January when you have such little depth at running back, especially when the offensive line is also a potential issue. So a pass blocking running back, why not Todd Gurley? Sean McVay knows Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley knows the offense. There's trust there. You mentioned Le'Veon Bell. Why not Adrian Peterson? Why not Frank Gore? I mean, these are the kind of running backs. I know in fantasy football, it's like nails on a chalkboard here, Frank Gore, or at this point, Adrian Peterson. But these running backs allow a coach to sleep at night, knowing that they have some veteran depth. They have someone who knows their way around a playbook, etc. Or they could wait. I think there has to be another shoe that drops here. There's just no way, unless Xavier Jones looks like James Robinson did last year in training camp. There's just no way they're not going to add somebody. But Matthew Stafford's pass volume is going to go up, and this may induce you to take a Rams receiver, if a tiebreaker, if you will, if you're right on the fence between Woods or Kupp and another player, or Higbee for that matter. And then the other side of this, I think this is more of a Dr. Gene thing. And for fantasy drafting, Cam Akers was at that 1-2 turn. So if you were looking at drawing a pick 10, 11, 12, you're probably looking at starting running back. Well, now that supply has just diminished by 1. And maybe if you were looking at a later second round pick where a Najee Harris, or maybe a Joe Mixon was Aaron Jones, I'm still seeing drop in drafts late in the second round. Now the chances of that running back slipping through are getting smaller if you're in the late second round. Now, Cam Akers long-term, Jason, because Marlon Mack, folks were putting dirt on his grave whenever he tore his Achilles last year. The refrain is no running back has ever come back all the way back from an Achilles. Is this a moment in dynasty leagues, or is this, hey, buy when there's blood in the streets? Do we think that because Akers is young, because of medical advancements, that he may be that breakthrough running back who can come all the way back? Or is this a moment, if you have Akers on your dynasty roster, to try to find somebody who believes that so you can get some amount of pennies on the dollar?
Yeah, great question. I mean, but in a world of supply and demand, you're much more likely to have more dynasty league managers in your league with you that are of the mind that this is a death knell than you are to find that think, oh, this is a great buy low, right? So that's going to be the trick is can you immediately identify one or two owners who are extremely optimistic? Maybe they're big time Akers fans in general, and they're willing to take the chance. I mean, I'm skeptical, as you said. I mean, Marlon Mack obviously is a nice story, and certainly I look back to you and I both old heads. We remember a time when torn ACLs were considered career threatening, and now it's like, oh, we'll see you in 9 months, you'll be back to perfect. So I do acknowledge the idea that that medical advances will continue to make torn Achilles better, more viable and less of a career ender. But that said, I mean, I don't know that we're suddenly there. And you're right to ask the question, Sig. And certainly there's going to be some running back that's the first to come back from an Achilles and be as dynamic as they once were. But it's just such a tough thing to forecast, not only because of the injury itself, but because it's, as you just alluded, it's a position that unfortunately has been completely diminished in the eyes of the most front offices and coaches, and it is viewed as fungible, whether we think it should be or not. And so I just think it's a far more likely scenario that by the time Akers is ready to be back on the field, they've already moved on or bolstered the roster in some way to offset his absence, and he'll have to fight for a role. So this is a pretty tough blow if you've got Akers as an anchor in your dynasty league. I don't think there's any way we can sugarcoat that.
None at all. But you might be want to take advantage of it. So I want to take a moment out to say whether it's this injury or Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson, you feel like you have the drop, you can still get into the Footballguys Players Championship. $350 to enter with a $500,000 grand prize. Drafts are running through the beginning of the season. There's a $50 discount. If you get a 3-pack of teams, you can put your knowledge, your fantasy football acumen to the test in the Footballguys Players Championship. It sells out every year, folks. So why not get in now? And one of the things that we'll be doing, and what everybody will be doing in these high stakes contests, is watching what's happening in training camp and adjusting. And what I'm happy to announce, I've announced a few times, that I am doing season-long projections now, joining an illustrious group, including Jason Wood, Bob Henry, who's kind of the Mac Daddy of season-long projections and all things projections. And it's a tremendous exercise, Woodrow. It's a tremendous exercise because it forces you to be honest. There are just sometimes that you want to have a player projected higher, or you want to have a player projected lower, but then you realize that will force you to take a bolder stand on a team than you really want to take. So you have to accept it. But as we go through our preseason projections, there are always teams, there are always situations that are puzzlers, that we have to affix the numbers somewhere, but we really wish we had more information, some of which we'll get in training camp and preseason, but some we won't, and some will still be flying on instruments here. When I say the toughest team to project in 2021, what name pops into your head?
The Dolphins. And let me with a 1B being the Packers, but I think with the Packers we're going to have a very binary answer to that soon,
right?
Which is that, and you know this, Sig, but for our watchers and listeners, I have been the torchbearer of the, hey, we may be really overdrafting the Packers skill players all during best ball season, because if Aaron Rodgers makes good on not showing up, then Robert Tonyan is not a tight end one. Aaron Jones probably isn't a top 6 to 8 running back. And most importantly, Devontae Adams isn't the consensus number 1 receiver. But we'll find that out. I mean, as we were discussing this week, training camps open in a week and change, and so we'll know if Rodgers shows up, then the industry vaults all those players back to where they belong at the tops of their tiers, and we're off to the races. If he doesn't show up, then I think a lot of people have to retrench and bring their numbers down to more in line with where mine are currently. But either way, we're going to get an answer to that. So I go back to my answer, which is the Dolphins. There's just so much uncertainty. I'm not sure what to make of Tua, as we have talked about on the couch before. He did not have an impressive rookie season. He knows he didn't. He has acknowledged it publicly. So that's good, but it doesn't take away from the fact that he didn't look very comfortable. They've done a lot in the offseason to bolster his supporting cast, which is great. But they have this strange conclave of co-offensive coordinators, which I don't know how that works. I don't know, and in business, you want one throat to choke. I don't know who that throat is. Who do we blame? Who do we praise? Who's the one that's going to make the key calls in game situation? And then you see these reports. Adam Schefter threw out very, very passively, nonchalantly that they're still very open to trading for Deshaun Watson if he's available after his legal issues are wrapped up, if they are cleared up, which tells you, well, geez, I mean, we're a week before training camp, and there's still reports out there that they're still hopeful of getting Watson. Now, Watson is a transcendent player, so there's nothing inherently wrong with being displaced for Deshaun Watson. However, it just does add to this narrative of, do the Dolphins even know who they are, what their identity is?
Right.
I don't know. When we talk about doing projections, I don't know if my run pass ratio for them is logical. I don't know if assuming Tua plays the entire season, if they don't make this blockbuster trade, is logical. I don't know. I have Myles Gaskin as a reasonably productive fantasy back, but I don't. That's based on a very small sample, and he's got durability issues. And even with the receivers, there's a ton of talent in the receiving core. But then I ask myself, are there going to be enough balls to go around to make Devontae Parker and Will Fuller and Jalen Waddle all eat and be fantasy relevant? So just a tremendous number of questions. And then I'll throw another one in, Mike Gesicki. I think because of what we think is going to happen with Jalen Waddle being such a natural fit in the slot, does Gesicki's fantasy relevance fall off a cliff? Some fantasy analysts have him as a clear-cut top 10 tight end. Many aren't sure. I'm in the I'm not sure camp. So I don't know what to make of this team. Really lock, stock, and barrel sick. How about you?
Yeah, that's a good one to zero in on, because first of all, you have the idea of how big will the pie be, or like you said, even what's the run pass split, but really how big will the pie be? Because Tua, and as you said, there's been a surprising amount of honesty. It was his hip. He wasn't as flexible as he normally is. It was Chan Gailey who was unceremoniously let go at the end of the season. The offense didn't really ask him to throw downfield. It was any number of things. Plus, remember, they had an offensive line that was under construction and brand new. But let's assume that they're getting these things lined up, right? Because Brian Flores, one of the things we're going to be talking about a lot going into the future, Woodrow, is all of these odds on Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, MVP. It's fun, and it's all tangential to things we do in fantasy football anyway. It's the same kind of analysis, right? And it was interesting because Brian Flores is one of the favorites. Now, I say favorite for Coach of the Year. Favorite for Coach of the Year is like 13-1 or 14-1.
Right.
So it's still not any kind of runaway favorite. Actually, speaking of the Rams, Brandon Staley was, I think, 13-1, which I actually kind of like the Brandon Staley, because looking at that, I'm getting sidetracked now. It's teams that show a lot of improvement. And if the Chargers can go from like 7 wins to 11 wins, Brandon Staley is going to be on that list. But Brian Flores is on the list too. Now, Flores has done a lot of things, he and Chris Greer, to get this team on track and to have a plan and execute the plan. But one of the odd areas has been the way they've handled their assistant coaches. And there's been a lot, we're already on iteration 3 of offensive coordinators.
Right.
And I say coordinators really on the nose because they have co-offensive coordinators, Eric Studesville and George Godsey, which I think was an attempt to create some continuity for Tua. In general, you can look at the offseason moves saying, we're going to give Tua no excuses this year. And then, as you said, Adam Beasley, I think, was the first one to float that they've been told that if Watson gets his stuff cleared up, which is a massive, massive if,
no doubt,
they could still be in on him. But let's say you believe in Tua, like you said, what do you do projecting the passing game after that? Because if you look at one of the things I like to do, Woodrow, is look at ADP on a team level, right? And say, does this make sense? Because if you can look at ADP for a team, all the players for a team, and see if the hive mind is kind of agnostic, pessimistic, optimistic about an offense. And if you're looking for offenses that have 3 wide receivers in the top 120, you're usually talking about the juggernaut passing offenses. You're talking about Dallas, you're talking about Tampa, you're talking about Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. And I don't know if this is true because I've seen Parker fall more and more every draft that I do, but at least as of mid-June at Underdog, all 3 of Fuller, Waddle, and Parker were in the top 120, which either Tua is going to have some massive breakout year, or there's just no way that all 3 of those guys can live up to that ADP. Or even worse, it's going to be the kind of situation that week to week is very difficult to predict. So we're talking about best ball only. And then you added in Mike Gesicki, who's also right around pick 120, which for tight end is somewhat rich. And how, if with this picture, to me, it points to week, it's going to be very difficult to predict what's going on. Now, Will Fuller could get hurt and clarify it. Javon Parker and Will Fuller could get hurt and clarify it. And that certainly could be an angle that you play on it. But if you look at this offense, I think we're not projecting Tua to be a 4,500, 5,000 yard passer in any scenario, which makes it really difficult to have one of these guys, except for maybe Will Fuller, only because last year so there's, here's the riddle of Fuller, Woodrow. I mean, did he turn the corner last year? Was he able to stay healthy? Remember, he only missed games because of a suspension. Was that the reason he was able to stay healthy? Of course, we're going to put that together. He was all levels of the field receiver last year. He was a short and intermediate guy as much as he was a deep ball guy. If you had to put a chip on a Dolphins receiver at ADP, would it be Fuller or would it be someone else?
I mean, first on Fuller, I was always very skeptical of Fuller, not only for his durability, but as you alluded there, I think until last year we weren't really sure that he was at least because he wasn't used that way. If he was anything more than just a streaks vert kind of guy, who really made his money there. But you're right. I mean, last year he absolutely proved that he, when healthy, can be an all-around receiver, run a full route tree. He looked great. I mean, you can't look at the film last year and say he didn't look great. So I love the signing. He has a suspension. He has to finish serving to start the year. But now with 17 weeks, it's really not that impactful to projections, honestly. I guess one of the reasons I find this team so hard to project, I actually have in PPR scoring Waddle, Fuller, and Parker all bunched up very close. I have Waddle with 190 PPR points, Fuller with 184, and Parker with 177. And honestly, the delta there is touchdowns. I have Waddle with 6 and Parker with 4. So touchdowns being what they are, if that were to reverse, then they would flip flop. So I'm comfortable drafting. I have in the underdog best balls, I've definitely rostered them if they're there for me. But I definitely feel better about taking him as my 4th receiver than I do counting on them. But if I had gun to my head, I'd have to say Waddle, just because that's the youth movement. That's the team invested an extremely high draft capital in him. He has a great pedigree, and he's the one that we know for sure the team expects to be a massive contributor to this team as they build into contention over the next 3 to 5 seasons. Whereas it's very possible that both Fuller and Parker are completely out of the picture next year or the year after, regardless of how they play this year. So I think Waddle would be the guy if I had a choice of all 3 on the board at a place I was looking to take a receiver. But I won't at all be surprised if one of the 2 veterans ends up having the best year just based on touchdown volatility or health.
Yeah, Waddle is probably the best, just the allure of the unknown, right? If
Yeah.
you're going to put a chip on somebody, the allure of the unknown. Parker didn't really display great chemistry with Tua last year. It was actually Preston Williams, the forgotten man.
Yeah, no kidding.
He was on the same page with Tua, and again, for the second straight year, went down during his breakout game. And then there's Fuller, and I understand putting a chip on Fuller purely on talent, but I think his ADP already reflects that people are.
It does. It does, yeah.
If I'm looking at in ADP range of Waddle and Fuller, like Tyler Boyd, oh, come on, I'm going to take Tyler Boyd. Even weighing them against players like, I don't know, McCole Hardman or Darnell Mooney, I'm not sure that I'm going to go elsewhere than a Miami receiver, and that also includes Gesicki, again, just because of the uncertainty. And I think projecting those players. And it's interesting, Woodrow, I know that with projections, sometimes we use the numbers to send a message. And sometimes the message is just a shoulder shrug. And I think that's kind of what we have with the Dolphins passing game for now. Let's stay in Florida. What do we do with the Jacksonville Jaguars? We have Urban Meyer, but we also have a cup runneth over of skill players that it's difficult. This is classic. There's only one ball in the backfield. There's only one ball in the passing game. Tim Tebow is lurking. What do we do?
Yeah, another interesting one. no one should be making any grand proclamations with certainty on this team because it's a completely different regime. New quarterback, new head coach, new play caller, new chef cooking, getting the ingredients. It's completely different. So and then making matters even more complicated, right? It's Urban Meyer, who is a legendary Hall of Fame football coach. We know he coached football, but it's all been collegiate. So we don't know. And we've seen just little inklings. I think when I was on the show talking about coaches, we joked about a few of the inklings that just say, like, there are signs that Urban is old school and struggling to keep up with the treadmill of the modern professional player and how to handle them versus when you have. So, but that being said, it is what it is. So it's interesting. I have found one thing that I think is worth mentioning. Whether it's years ago when we used to just do a ton of mock drafts to now where a lot of us do a ton of relatively inexpensive best ball drafts. And the reason I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I do a ton of them, not for I'm going to try and win big money or anything. It's actually quite the opposite. I do them purely as an exercise to try and be a better analyst, in that I think there's nothing like live, smart, engaged ADP data and getting a feel for the drafts and getting a feel for tiers. So I do them pretty consistently. I have 10, 12 running at all times throughout the preseason, just to get that sense. And one of the things I found, Sig, is that I am higher on Trevor Lawrence than I expected I would be. I'm very frequently finding myself in a position to comfortably take him as my second quarterback. And I went back to the drawing board, looked at my projections, thought, well, why do I keep seeing him as the clear option in that tier of available quarterbacks? It just seems like he screams at me, yet my numbers don't necessarily play that out. And I think there's two things. First of all, Lawrence is incredibly mobile, but I think probably because he's white, let's be honest, a lot of people aren't really factoring that into their projections. He was just as mobile as Fields was the last 2 seasons in college. He ran as much, he scored as much. Now, in a track meet, I'm not saying that Fields isn't the faster, more agile open field runner, but I'm just saying this is a part of Lawrence's game at Clemson that we shouldn't overlook. Particularly because if you think about what we know of Urban Meyer with this spread offense, I mean, we forget Alex Smith ran all over the place at Utah. So Tebow, right? So I think he's going to let and expect Lawrence to use his legs when appropriate, and that's, as we know, a running quarterback is the fantasy solve. So that's one thing. I think people's expectations for him as a runner are muted, unfairly so. And then the other thing is, I know people groan at Darrell Bevell as a hire. I get it. But as I think we talked about a few months ago, Darrell Bevell is the only experienced play caller among the new rash of play callers. And while that has a ceiling, we know Darrell Bevell is very unlikely to be the architect of a top 3 to 5 game breaking offense. It also comes with a really nice floor. Darrell Bevell has far often than not been a top quartile to top third offensive play caller. More often than not, as long as he has the players, his offenses are functional and adequate, right? They're not elite, but they're adequate. They're never disasters. They're never dumpster fires. And so to me, having Bevell at the helm here to take all these disparate pieces that they added in free agency in the draft, I actually, it gives me comfort. I think that if the Jaguars under Lawrence's tenure are to evolve into a Super Bowl contender, it will likely be with a different play caller than Darrell Bevell. But I think for 2021 and 2022, he's exactly the kind of play caller I want to see get this offense to a point where then he can hand the baton off to someone who can really take it from a solid B to an A+. So so I'm pretty comfortable with the Jaguars passing attack I have Lawrence for 4,300 yards. And 24 touchdowns. I think he'll throw a lot of interceptions because rookie quarterbacks do that. I've met 15 interceptions, but overall, I think it's pretty good. And then, of course, the other part, which broke all of our hearts, is the Travis Etienne versus James Robinson factor. And I was pretty stubborn at first when they drafted Etienne and thought, well, that doesn't matter. Robinson was so good last year. He's still going to be a workhorse. I've really softened my stance on that as I've taken in input from other people that I respect and really thought through the situation and reading the tea leaves of the comments from Urban Meyer and the like. I think we have to assume unfortunately, barring injuries, that Meyer is going to try and make Etienne the centerpiece of this offense. Now, much love to our mutual friend and colleague, Matt Waldman. I very much pay attention to Waldman and his concerns about Etienne in that role. So I'm not all in on Etienne in that role, but I think the coaches are. And I think that at least for the first half season or this whole first season as a rookie, they're going to try and make him the guy, and particularly as a receiver. So I do now have Etienne significantly ahead of Robinson in my projections and rankings, particularly in PPR. I think Etienne's going to catch 60 minimum receptions this year if he's healthy, and probably much more than that. So I think Etienne as a running back too in PPR formats makes a lot of sense, and I wasn't of that mind the last time I was on the couch. And then that leaves Robinson with the scraps. Yes, in a perfect world, he could still get a ton of carries on first and second down and be the goal line back, and that is definitely in the range of outcomes. But I do worry with the coaching regime changeover. We are making a big assumption that they're going to look at Robinson and just assume that he is a stud and they're going to keep using him. So I'm nervous about Robinson, but I do continue to find myself adding him in best ball because I feel like, in spite of what I view as a pretty nervous outlook, I feel like others have completely cratered their expectation for him. So he is still available if you go take other positions early, take a quarterback or a tight end or something. He's still there for you as your running back 3. So I'm not off of him completely, but I'm more skeptical of him reaching his upside, even coming close to matching what we saw last year, than I was 2 months ago.
If you're looking at Robinson, you're looking at him around the same point in your draft as players like Michael Carter, Raheem Mostert.
I'd rather have him than both of those guys.
Right. Who else? Damian Harris.
Rather have Robinson.
So these are the guys, right? And the tension, as you point out by referencing Matt Waldman, is rational coaching versus a coach king, if you will, that feels complete power. Meyer is certainly giving off vibes that he's going to run things his way. He's not going to just be a delegator. He's not coming in to assemble a staff and just let them do their thing. That he's going to have his fingers and everything there. And again, we have these tensions, Woodrow. Like, there's the aspiration, because the aspiration for the offense probably is a run-heavy offense. If we're going back to Ohio State, right? If we're going back to these offenses, like you said, Trevor Lawrence. I have Trevor Lawrence for 82 rush attempts. Maybe that's too low. Maybe he's over 100. Looking at some of the different things, I actually have him at 28 pass touchdowns and 15 interceptions. So I think we're in the same vicinity there. So I haven't thrown the ball over 600 times, just slightly over 600. But because of the game scripts this team is going to be in, not necessarily because of the design of the offense or what their priorities will be going into every game. And then we have the layer of deciphering what we're going to get out of training camp. And like you said, you bring up the name Darrell Bevel. Something we could look at, Woodrow, is just a real raw piece of information is when it's time to get quotes for the offense, are more of the quotes coming from Meyer or from Bevel?
Excellent
things
point.
Things like that, right? We have to see, because it's an unknown. And part of that unknown is, well, geez, you look at the Jacksonville receivers and it sure looks a lot like the Miami receivers in the sense that none of them are going in the first 6 rounds. All are going in that 7 to 11 round range. And again, we're looking at a tension between rational coaching, which I would say would point towards Laviska Shenault, at least based on everything we heard this spring, that he was so impressive. Many observers, different observers, saying he was the most impressive player on the field for the team. Of course, he has to stay healthy. It wasn't always a given when he was at Colorado. Then you have DJ Chark. Ooh. Urban Meyer saying he's a big receiver that plays small. And when we're looking at a coach who seems like he's going to want to put his fingerprints on everything, well, you don't necessarily love hearing. Now, maybe Chark answers the bell and does everything Meyer wants him to do, becomes that player he wants him to play, playing big, and Chark becomes the number one that we think he can become. But if not, there's also Marvin Jones, who has that history with Darrell Bevel, and he'll probably have the easiest ramp up into the new offense. So who knows? We're going to decipher all of these things coming out. One of the things I wanted to mention on what you said about Lawrence running, which I agree. And I think with Lawrence as your late round quarterback, the one thing we're just waiting for is Tim Tebow's release. If Tim Tebow gets released, now Lawrence upside's in full effect. If Tebow is on the team week 1,
You mean because he's gonna have a Taysom Hill type of a situation? Is what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. I got to be honest with you. I
Why
hadn't even thought of that.
Why else would he even be on the team?
Right.
And the thing is, you could say, oh, well, he's not going to make the team. Well, he was never supposed to be signed. The odds of him not being signed were the same as him not making the team until he was signed. So a rational actor who signs Tim Tebow is not someone that we have to say, well, he'll be rational when it comes time to make the final cutdown decisions. But he didn't make a rational decision when he signed Tim Tebow.
Right. So, yeah. This I know that when he was signed, we had that a staff discussion about that. You're right. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's a brilliant move, and it's going to allow Tebow to take up all the media attention. And I was with you. I'm thinking that's not rational, though. Why? I'm not going to believe that someone is that Machiavellian that they're thinking, let me bring in Tim Tebow so that he can be the media circus fodder, so that I can then behind the scenes run this team. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you want that distraction in that? Because players are people. How do you think all these young players are going to feel? They're going to feel some kind of way when after practice there's 73 cameras wanting to talk to Tim Tebow about how he felt running pass routes, and meanwhile Laviska Shenault just went out and had 3 over the top beautiful touchdown grabs from Lawrence, and no one wants to talk to him. I mean, that affects team chemistry. That gets side eyes. That is irrational. If that's why I don't think that's why they did it, but if that's why they did it, that's another reason why I'm skeptical of Urban Meyer at this level. So I'm with you. But I have to be honest, I hadn't in my projections. I mean, I have Tebow making the team with 4 receptions. I hadn't thought of him as a Trevor Lawrence disruptor, but now you've got my wheels spinning. So I very much hope he does not make the cut. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, Urban has to capture that locker room, which was a problem in previous Jaguars teams, that based on personnel moves. A lot of what I heard was after Blake Bortles was signed to an extension, they really started to lose the locker room because the players know. The players know who can play and who can't play.
And one thing for you to consider, and I know this from my painful time as an Eagles fan back then, when the Eagles signed Chip Kelly, a lot of heads were scratched because you have this well-known, famous college innovator coming in to run a team. And then he hired Pat Shurmur as his offensive coordinator. And a lot of people are like, what is going on? Like, why would this guy who loves to think out of the box and is all about pace bring in this stodgy NFL guy that isn't really known for being very innovative? And we then found out, well, because Pat Shurmur wasn't the architect, right? I mean, Chip Kelly just wanted someone that could help him run the meetings. And to your point, Urban has said that Bevel will call the plays. If we get any inclination that he's retrenched on that or is going to have a heavy hand, then I'm much more nervous about how the season progresses.
Yeah, it's skeptical of any particular outcome because we just can't know. Okay, let's start. Let's move into kind of a lightning round. I'll start it off with the actual question.
Sure.
But somewhat revolving around projections. Before we do that, folks, I want to remind everybody that if you're listening to the sound of my voice and you're not on the Footballguys email update list, what are you doing? Cecil, Joe, myself, giving you reactions to all the news of the day, and the fire hose is coming, folks. There will be a fire hose of information. I think July 27th is the day that all of the camps will be open. And we're going to sift through all that for you. We're going to tell you the significance, tell you what to keep an eye on, and keep an eye on it for you if you sign up for the Footballguys daily email update. Okay, so let's start with Travis Etienne. Let's sift through some of these questions. Rookie running back you're targeting around the 5th, 6th round. Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, or Trey Sermon?
Etienne, but I like all three. I will say I have almost no shares in best ball of Javonte because he seems like he goes a little earlier than that.
Yeah.
Trey Sermon, it's interesting, depends on the league. Trey Sermon is I think the easiest to get right now because his like the loaded ADP and projections for the main sites have him as being very much a third stringer. So if you're smart about that, you can arbitrage that. But as we know, once we get into the full swing of camp and everything, that's unlikely. So I would rank them Etienne, Sermon, and then Williams. I know Cecil has definitively said Javonte is the starter. I know on the Audible last week he made that reference, and certainly there's no one I trust more for a Denver edge than Cecil. So my ears perked up because I wouldn't at all be surprised if that's the case, but I certainly don't know that many of us view that as definitive. I mean, they didn't cut Melvin Gordon right after June 1st. So I don't know why you pay Melvin Gordon the money you're paying him. And he does, I know he's frustrating at times, but he has quite the history and pedigree why he wouldn't at least get the first crack at the job. But I certainly, I'm more interested in Javonte now that Cecil seems pretty definitive that he's the team wants him to be the guy.
Yeah, they're not attached to Gordon in any way, I think. And as I was talking about on a show I did yesterday, when you're talking about these rookie running backs, you care a lot more about what they're doing in week 11,
100%,
13 than week 4 or 5. You're taking these guys to be patient. You're taking these guys to be that kick down the stretch that you need to get your team over the top. Any or all of them are good choices. Like you said, Javonte Williams, I think he went in the mid-4th in my pros versus Joes. So he's definitely one where the time to get him at a discount, whatever, he's in the mix with your Gaskin, Davis, Darrell Henderson types. By the way, Nick D points out Rodgers news this morning. It was just Adam Schefter saying that he was offered a 2-year contract and said no. He was offered a 2-year contract extension that tied him to Green Bay for 5 more seasons and made him the highest paid quarterback and player in football, and he declined the offer. So
I'm just saying.
Okay, lightning round projections.
Okay.
And none of the above is also an acceptable answer.
Okay.
Arizona wide receiver 2.
I'm pausing because I have to actually check because it's tight. Let me
impenetrable see. Even.
I currently have Rondale Moore just edging out Christian Kirk,
and not AJ Green. And
I have AJ Green as the wide receiver 4. That could, like you said, great question because this could be totally wrong. It may be absurd of me to have a rookie projected ahead of AJ Green. I'm sure AJ Green signed thinking he's going to be the wide receiver 2, but that's how I have it right now.
And that's the thing, right? If you're honest, if you give DeAndre Hopkins the targets and catches that he deserves, what is left over? I think this is kind of a none of the above.
Oh, sure. Just to be clear, I have Hopkins with 160 targets. And let's remember, people, as you listen to this, we have 17 games now, so that these numbers may sound inflated. I have no other receiver on the roster with more than 80 targets.
Will anybody in the Ravens passing game other than Mark Andrews be a consistent fantasy player this year?
Consistent, no. But viable as a wide receiver 3 and perhaps ideal in a best ball format, yes. I do have Marquise Brown with 110 targets. And while long-term, I think the sky's the limit for Rashad Bateman, I have Sammy Watkins significantly higher than the pack. I don't know that he'd be usable in a traditional redraft setting where you have to set a lineup very often, but I do find it intriguing that he's reunited with Greg Roman. And as you know, Sig, Baltimore went out and got him. They made it pretty clear that they wanted him. There were plenty of other interesting receivers, arguably with higher upsides than he at the time they made that signing. And they went and said, he's our guy. Greg Roman had him at his best. He knows how to use him. So I'm intrigued by Watkins. And I think the takeaway there is I love what the Ravens did to take away any excuses for Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar Jackson should be right there with Mahomes as the number 1 fantasy quarterback, right there with Josh Allen if he's healthy. I don't see any excuses now. We know he can throw a very high touchdown rate when he has weapons. He's going to not stop running, obviously, and I just think he's got depth at receiver. I mean, Devin Duvernay and Miles Boykin are the 4th and 5th receivers on that team now. That is one of the deepest receiver cores in the league.
Yeah, it is very deep. And I think you're right to highlight Lamar Jackson as a player that could return to that 2019 level of just being unfair in fantasy lineups. Will the Carolina Panthers pass offense support 3 receivers, or was that just a byproduct of Christian McCaffrey getting hurt?
The latter. I don't see it. I seem to be higher on Darnold than the consensus. I guess I value Joe Brady a little bit more. Long-term, for dynasty purposes, I'd be pretty scared of this whole roster because I think if things go the way I think they're going to go this year, meaning that Darnold is a complete washout, then Joe Brady's getting an NFL head coaching job next year. And then I wouldn't have any expectations for them to maintain whatever happens this year going forward. So if I'm right about all that, though, since we're just talking about 2021, Yeah, I've never been as high on DJ Moore as others. I know touchdowns are quirky, but I just don't understand why he can't score. And I know that this is the year he probably scores 10 because I'm bringing it up. I was all over Robbie Anderson last year, and I think there's no reason to not be excited about him this year. But I think if those two stay healthy, Terrace Marshall's time will come, but it won't be 2021.
Yeah, I think that's something to take into account. And also that Sam Darnold and Robbie Anderson have played together a lot in the past, and at times have made some beautiful music together in the deep passing game. You also have to factor in how much is Adam Gase keeping Sam Darnold down.
That's the great question.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
And that great bounce. I know it's not going to work for Chris Herndon, though. I can tell you folks, if you wanted the post Gase bounce from Chris Herndon, it's not happening. I'm afraid we're going to stop trying to make Chris Herndon happen, at least from the early reports.
To quote my 12-year-old, big facts, Sigmund.
Yeah, big facts, unavoidable facts. Unfortunately, Chris Herndon will always have your rookie year, Chris Herndon. Okay, let's do a little mini segment here. Mm-hmm. The name of the segment is Who Will Start More Games at Quarterback, and Does It Matter?
Love it.
Denver.
Bridgewater, and it will matter in that it will take disaster off the table. But I don't expect many Broncos to be fantasy stars.
It's got to be good for Judy, right? That has to be good for Judy.
Yes. Again, I seem to be dropping his name a lot, but when you and Cecil, or when Cecil did you weren't on the episode. I keep saying you. Yeah. When Cecil and Waldman did last week's episode, I think Cecil did a great job of highlighting Judy versus Sutton and it being highly correlated to Locke versus Bridgewater. I think people should listen to the episode if they haven't, and I do agree with his analysis.
Yeah, it's the timing and the high percentage throws. That's Judy's wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. Okay, Chicago.
Fields. I just don't think you make that move with a player that's got the whole league and fandom excited without. This is a modern era where you want to get these rookies some experience so that you can play them in year two. And the real value of these guys, frankly, is how cheap their rookie contracts are. So much love to Andy Dalton, but unless he plays absolutely lights out and that defense has them, I don't know, 5-1, 6-1. I think they'll be looking for a reason to put Fields on the field. Fields on the field, no pun intended.
Yeah, I like it. And that's the thing. I've come back to this a few times already on the show, Woodrow. If the Bears are winning in spite of Dalton, and I think most of us think Dalton will start week one. If the Bears are winning in spite of Dalton, will Matt Nagy be able to discern that? Will he be bold enough to make the switch to Fields if Dalton is not the reason they're winning, but they still have a winning record? Yeah. And there could be a similar proposition in San Francisco.
I have Fields starting 13 games for the record.
Yeah, I think I have it more like 10-7, but I think at some point we're going to see that switch midseason. But what about San Francisco? Because San Francisco, I think there's more of a door open for Lance to start week one, but it's up to Lance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't disagree with what you just said, that I'd be less surprised by Lance being a week one starter than I would be Fields. However, in my projections, I have Lance starting 9 of 17 games because I think there's a better chance that the 49ers will be an overall very good team with Garoppolo. And I think, but how do I say this? So my baseline projection that you see on the site would argue that Fields plays more. But I think there's also a much wider volatility of outcomes with Lance this year. So I have Lance projected for 9 starts and Garoppolo for 8. But I think that is something we'll obviously get some indication of as training camp goes on. If we start seeing reports like Lance is going throw for throw, or he's so much more explosive, I will certainly be adjusting that accordingly. I wouldn't be at all surprised if by the time we get close to breaking camp, we all have Lance as a 15 to 17 game starter and then significantly higher in our rankings as a result.
And then how does that trickle down to the values of the other players in San Francisco?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we have to assume, we talk about rational coaching all the time. I would argue that if Lance does earn a week one start or an early season start, then that is indicative, because I think Kyle Shanahan is rational. Mm-hmm. That it's a plus for the offense, right? So I think certainly we all think that Lance will be massively more mobile than Garoppolo and thus have much more per game fantasy upside, regardless of what the passing numbers look like. I think it's all good news. I don't see this. I think if things go the way the way that Shanahan wants them to. I don't think this is going to be a high volume passing offense. So I think it'll be probably the second or third best rushing offense in the league, and that would be inclusive of Lance contribution. And I think as a result, I think it gets dangerous if you're projecting massive target volume for anyone. I think Kittle, if healthy, 120 targets makes sense in a 17-game season. Ayuk and Samuel. I have Ayuk. I don't know where you are right now, but I have Ayuk with slightly better numbers. But I can't say that I'm beholden to that. I like him slightly more in a vacuum than I do Debo. But I haven't really gotten comfortable with how to attenuate that based on which quarterback is under center.
It's difficult because we would expect lower pass volume with Lance, maybe higher efficiency, but we've still also not had a chance to see a healthy Ayuk, Samuel, and Kittle for most of the season.
Right.
So who knows? Lots more questions than answers. Last quarterback quandary, New England.
I know we differ greatly on the future value of this player, but I currently have Mac Jones starting.
I'm coming around.
Okay, I have Mac Jones starting 5 games, but I will tell you that is a stale projection. In that, as you know, I don't make a habit of changing my projections from the post-draft free agency period until training camp because I just think a lot of it's noise. But I really do think if you listen to the drum beats, as you're wont to say, it just does seem like the tie goes to Mac Jones, right? So if Mac Jones looks competent running that playbook and Belichick is comfortable with him being able to execute the plays that McDaniels wants to call, I would not be at all surprised if Mac Jones is the week 1 starter. Not projecting it that way because we can't ignore Cam Newton, right? Especially in Superflex leagues. Cam Newton, even though he was abysmal as a passer last year. I mean, bad isn't even a fair. He was abysmal as a passer last year. That rushing game made him fantasy relevant a lot of weeks. So I can't ignore him. I don't want people to ignore him on draft day in deeper leagues. But man, oh man, I'm beginning to be open to the idea that Mac Jones was going to take this job and run.
It's the most thrilling quarterback competition. What I mean by that is
because they're so different, right?
Right. Well, and it's thrilling in the sense that it has this prelude of all spring. Cam Newton. I've said this once or twice on the show already, folks, but I'm back from vacation. We're dusting everything off. Everyone's used to me repeating myself. Mac Jones, most every day of the spring, just looked like a quarterback executing plays, right? Making accurate throws on time. It's against air. It should look like that. Cam Newton spraying the ball over the place. It was brutal. Some of it was hard to watch, honestly. And you're telling me this is going to be a quarterback competition? There's no competition here at all. Now, you can say some things in Cam Newton's favor. The COVID offseason that didn't allow him to really mesh with Josh McDaniels. They had terrible talent in the passing game. They obviously rectified that this offseason. They have a good offensive line, by the way. They have even without Joe Thuney, they have a good offensive line that should be a plus. But and then Newton also refers to his time coming back from COVID as something that affected his game. But at the same time, he's not showing it in OTAs until the very last day of OTAs, Woodrow. The very last day of OTAs, he just looks like Cam Newton of old. And it left everybody covering the team. Because the Patriots, while they are one of the most covered teams, generally the beat writers there are pretty level-headed. You don't see a lot of get carried away takes. And there was just a lot of reports saying, wow, Cam Newton really gave everyone something to think about on this last day of OTAs. Let's see what happens. All this stuff, hopefully, folks, is getting you excited to take everything in a training camp. And again, if you like what's going on here, if you want to support the show, all the shows on the Football Guys channel, you want to support what we do, all of our interactions on Twitter, in the message board, the Shark Pool, get a Football Guys subscription, money back guaranteed. You can go with the season-long option, season-long and DFS, or just DFS. We're going to be there for you, covering all of your needs. We go off the rails the last couple minutes here. We're a little bit late, but there's a lot to talk about. Woodrow, I'm going to just tee it up to you this way. Can we talk about Biz Markie? May he rest in peace.
Oh, absolutely, man. I mean, yeah, to you and I, two old school hip hop heads. I mean, the Biz is. I would say that there are musicians of any genre that transcend like their genre, and I think most people, when they saw Biz Markie passed away, probably just think of him as a one-hit wonder, right? Just like, I mean, like people that aren't true hip hop fans, and they think, oh, I remember that guy. But I think if you really want to dig in, if you're interested in understanding his legacy, you should really understand he was one of those. He was like in like a solar system. He was like the sun. He was just a guy that attracted talent, that cultivated talent. He was an incredible mentor. I mean, he really was the definition of a mentor to so many amazing musicians that I think he had a much higher place in the pantheon of the history of hip hop than his discography might suggest to the average person.
And he's known as the Clown Prince of Hip Hop, which is a fine title. But as you said, there's a lot more under the surface. And what it takes me back to, because like you said, old school. And it's funny, I talked to some of the youngsters here around New Orleans, and I want to just tell them, have you ever listened to Stetsasonic? Have you ever listened to, Heavy D? Have you ever listened to, you know what I mean? I want to just go through all this stuff and say,
sure.
Have you ever listened to this? You ever listen to this? Because one of the great things about growing up around the time we did, I still say 1988 was the greatest year in hip hop. If you look at the albums that were released in 1988, nothing else can hold a candle to it. Now, when I was in college in 93, 94, 95, that's when independent hip hop, like really the rainbow.
That's my favorite era. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And then college at that time, I remember every week you were getting something that you had never heard anything like that before. You know, it's DOS Effects or it's the Fugees or something. You were always hearing something like you had never heard before. But when I was in middle school, that's back when we were all getting our CDs at National Record Mart. We'd watch Yo MTV Raps. We'd go to National Record Mart on Saturday. Yo MTV Raps was Friday night. We'd all buy CDs and we would copy them for each other. So you'd have all these tapes. And again, you got your Biz Markie tape. And you never heard anything like Biz Markie before, right? Hey, Ma, what's for dinner? And the thing about Biz Markie, I think that stands out when we think of his effect on human beings is he was always having a good time, right? So much drama in hip hop, right? But Biz, like you said, he was the sun smiling down on all of us. And go ahead.
Oh, I was going to agree with you. You know, there's when you look back at different periods of hip hop, certainly there have been some pretty heavy times. I mean, there's a component of rap that is inextricably linked to growing up in the streets, right? And so obviously we have the East Coast, West Coast. There's certainly there's no doubt that you can't extricate yourself from that. But there was an era, as you alluded, in the late 80s, early 90s, where a lot of dudes were coming at this from a different vibe, right? And it was almost like, you know, hippie rap or college rap, but it was just people rapping about fun stuff, about wilding out with your friends, being stupid, relationships, partying. And I think because I was in college at the time, it magnified my love for that, because I was living that life at the same time. And there was a positivity to it. And Biz was a part of that, you know, but you have you have Tribe and Brand Nubian and the Jungle Brothers and De La Soul. I mean, this whole conclave of groups that kind of all did their thing around that same time. And I will say, I'm going to sound like crotchety old man here. I still listen to a ton of current rap music, but there isn't much of that anymore. Like just the totally upbeat, you know, at least not on the airwaves. There's not just a totally upbeat like there's pop rap. There's rap that's like mid for top 40, but like highly produced. But there isn't just the, I don't know, that like we're just vibing out and having a good time kind of rap as much as anymore. And I miss it, but yeah, for sure. Rest in peace.
So maybe this will encourage you folks to check out some old school raps and Biz Markie. Of course, I'm going to be like a crotchety old man and say that same thing. Although I will say, just a shout out to Lil Nas X, because the man knows what he's doing. He's a wizard as far as surfing the wave of the current media environment and understanding how to put out his vibe in a way that is unadulterated. No
argument there, my friend. Those devil sneakers were quite the marketing move.
Oh man. Yeah. So I get it, folks. And we're here to get it for you always at footballguys.com. It's coming. You feel it. The fire hose, the wave, fantasy drafts, football. I think we're down to 7 more Sundays coming up this Sunday. And we're going to be with you every Sunday, every other day. before that, folks, we appreciate taking this journey with you always. Check out everything we have going on at Football Guys. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the videos, comment on the videos, please, to help us show your support if you like what we're doing. And we hope we continue to have the opportunity to do that for you.